Storytime about how a strange man abused me because I did not want to give him my phone number. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I sent him on Instagram. That's when he slid his hand onto my lap. I quickly get up from the table and ask him to leave. That's when he said, "Why are you freaking out? I'm just trying to get your number." Then I told him that there was absolutely zero chance I would ever give him my phone number. And he said, "Oh, you think you have a choice?" And he holds out his phone so that I could type in my number. I pushed his phone back and again asked him to leave. He threatened me and said that he wouldn't leave until I gave him my number. My knees and hands were shaking. Look back at my employees behind the counter and they are scared. That's when one of my employees says, "I'm gonna call the cops." And I said, "Yes, call them." As soon as I turned back to this man, he swings at me. He wasn't able to reach my face, but then he grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me down onto the ground. This all happened in about 30 seconds. As I'm on the ground, he starts slapping me. I covered my face with my arms and I just started kicking at him. And my two female employees, who by the way are like 17 and 18, start attacking the guy. And then he starts hitting them. Thankfully, two men from the street hear me yelling. I came in and tackled him and the police arrived 2 minutes later. I found out this guy was stalking me for a month. I got a restraining order. Be careful out there. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, "Wow, you're growing into your body," or "Wow, you got great hips." He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, "Ew." He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, "Oh, you know how he is." So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. That's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle. Storytime about how my asshole boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 months. We're both pretty young. I'm 19 and he's 22. I could say that he's just young and he doesn't know how to treat a woman yet, but he's pretty immature in everything else. Now you might wonder why I'm with him. It's because I love him. I met him when I was 15 in high school and I've been in love with him ever since. He always used to tell me that I was too young for him, but finally when I turned 18, he started paying attention to me. I begged him to go on a date with me and he finally said yes. At first, everything was so amazing. He was fun, charismatic, and super affectionate. When he finally asked me to be his girlfriend, I was so happy. But then slowly he started criticizing everything I wear. He doesn't like when I wear hoodies or sweaters, leggings or pants, skirts that are too short, skirts that are too loose, or crop tops. First he would politely say things, but now he's just straight up mean about it. He told me when I'm around him I can wear skimpy clothes, but when we go out he wants me to wear stuff that's loose. So I literally changed everything I wore. I dressed only for him and I started hating myself. Part 2 is Part 2 of how my boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimers are not my story time, send me on Instagram. I completely changed the way I dress just for him. He would always find something to criticize, even down to the jewelry or hair accessories or makeup that I wore. It got to the point where if I went shopping, I would send him pictures of the stuff that I wanted to buy for him to approve. Even my nails. Anytime I went to the nail salon, I would have to send him pictures of the nail polish or any designs I wanted to do. And don't think that he's paying for stuff. No, he's not. I finally opened up to my mom and told her everything. She told my dad and they both got really upset. My dad even called my boyfriend and told him to come over. My parents told him to stop being so controlling, otherwise the relationship would be over. Of course, my boyfriend pretended to be on his best behavior, apologized and said that he wouldn't do it anymore. But when we left my parents' house, he told me I was a snitch. Then he made me promise to never tell my parents anything about our relationship again. And I know I should just break up with him, but I do love him. I've been in love with him for years, and now that I'm with him, I don't want to lose him. But I know that I've put him up on a pedestal. It's been a few weeks since my parents intervened, but my boyfriend hasn't changed a thing. I decided to buy myself a designer purse that I've been wanting for years. As soon as he saw me with the purse, he said that my privilege was showing, and that I needed to go return it as soon as possible because it was embarrassing. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. After he told me to return the designer purse, I said no. He then explained to me why I should be embarrassed to wear it. He said people that buy designer stuff are only trying to flaunt their wealth, and that people who do that are just trying to cover up their shortcomings. So basically, I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm not good at other things, or that I don't have good qualities. I couldn't believe what he was saying to me. For the first time ever, I defended myself and I told him he needed to leave me alone. And no, I didn't return the purse, and I'm not trying to flaunt my wealth either. So here's what I did. I started returning all the clothes that I bought just to wear for him and the ones he wants me to wear in front of other people. When he saw me again, he told me that I looked terrible. He said no one would take me seriously in my outfit with my designer purse. So I drove him back to his house because no, he doesn't have a car, and I've been ignoring his calls and messages for 4 days. My plan is to start treating him the way he treated me. I'm going to control and criticize everything he wears and see how he likes it. I think this is going to make things better. I don't want to break up with him because I do love him. What do you guys think? Story time about how I'm still engaged after 16 years. My fiance asked me to marry him when I was 20 years old and I am now 36. It's been that long. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, send me on Instagram. Let's call my fiance Ted. Ted is a great guy, aside from the fact that he pushes back our wedding day all the time. A little backstory. We are both very career-driven people. We both work very hard and travel for our jobs. He works on Wall Street and I work for a beauty conglomerate. We're very wealthy, so we could be having kids right now if we wanted to. But of course, he says that we should wait until we get married. Every time I bring up the fact that we still haven't gotten married after 16 years, he gets annoyed and upset. Worst of all, we barely spend time together because we both work so much. I have to interrupt. This foundation is amazing, you guys. Where are my pores? It's from the brand Estertaniaj Beauty and it is cruelty-free. I don't think my skin has ever looked this good in makeup. Back to the story. I started getting really suspicious because of how many times he's pushed back the wedding. So I decided to do some research. When we first got engaged, he told me the ring was worth $45,000. I got it appraised and it turns out it's a fake ring and it's only worth $200. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. After I found out the ring was fake, I came up with a plan to confront my fiance. I made sure to get home earlier than he did. When he came into the apartment, I was standing right by our balcony. He comes over to me and gives me a kiss. Then I take off the engagement ring and I throw it over the balcony. He pretended like he was freaking out. That's when I told him I got the ring appraised and that it was a fake, and that it was only worth $200 instead of the $45,000 he told me he spent. The man was too stunned to speak. I could tell he was trying to come up with some lie in his head, so I gave him a minute to think. Then he says that he bought the ring from a friend who's a jeweler, and that he must have scammed him out of the $45,000. After 45 minutes of arguing, I was exhausted. I decided to go to sleep. I woke up a few hours later and I overhear him on the phone. That's when I heard him say she knows that the ring is fake and I think she knows about us. Part 3 is up. This palette is also from Estertaniaj Beauty and it's cruelty-free. These shadows blend like a dream. Go to part 3. Part 3 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. That's when I hear my fiance on the phone saying, I think she knows about us. My heart sank to my stomach. I stood there and listened to the rest of the conversation. He was whispering, so it was hard to make out. All I could hear was, I'll have to tell her the truth now. I went back to our room and pretended to be asleep. He comes in and wakes me up and tells me that he has to talk to me. That's when he starts telling me everything. He said when he asked me to marry me, he had every intention of doing so. But the more he traveled, the further he felt away from me. That's when he told me he met someone in his travels, and that he'd been seeing this woman for 10 years. He even had a house with her in a different city. It turns out that every time he would travel, it was only to see her. My world was completely shattered. Worst of all is that he was so happy after he told me. He moved out that week and now I am totally alone. I gave him the best years of my life and my time was totally wasted. I feel like he should be punished for this, but I don't think he broke any laws. What should I do? The mascara and lip balm are also from Estertaniaj Beauty. How good does my skin look? Bye! Okay, so here's a little story time, but it's a little TMI. So I'm really sensitive to like smells. If I smell bad, I know it. And if other people smell bad, I know it. And it bothers me so much. So I was filming a movie in Waco, Texas, and everything was fine. But a few days into the shoot, I started noticing that my armpits were smelling like rotten fruit. It's hard to describe how I smell. I can only compare it to guava. It bothered me so much. The next day I went to wardrobe and started sniffing all the clothes that I had worn the day before, and it all smelled like guava. So I went and picked up the Kopari deodorant. This is a coconut deodorant and it smells so good. When I was doing my research, I realized that this is like skincare for your armpits, and I use skincare on my face and my body. Why don't I do it on my armpits? It's also free of aluminum, baking soda, and it's 100% plant-based. I don't smell like guava anymore, thank God. If you have any embarrassing BO story times, let me know in the comments because I don't want to be the only one.